The Arizona sun burned down with a merciless fire that seemed to strip the land of all mercy, all softness, all memory of rain, and Sam Harlan rode through it the way he always did, with the silence of a man who had grown used to carrying his burdens alone and the steady rhythm of a rancher who had nothing left but the land, the cattle, and his own ghosts. He was a tall figure, broad-shouldered, his face leathered by wind and years of riding under the punishing desert sky, his eyes a steely gray that had seen both the killing fields of war and the loneliness of nights spent without family or friend, and though people in the town of Dry Creek sometimes wondered how he had managed to last out there without a wife, without children, without any real kin, Sam never offered them answers, for his heart was a locked chest, and the key had been buried long ago in blood and fire and sorrow. The desert stretched around him like a vast sea of red earth and jagged stone, where mesquite trees twisted their gnarled branches toward the sky and vultures circled patiently, waiting for something weaker than himself to fall, and Sam, riding his bay gelding named Dusty, kept his eyes low, scanning the horizon not for company but for signs of trouble. Cattle strayed too far, coyotes looking for a meal, or worse, raiders whose arrows could whistle through the night without warning. He had made peace with his solitude years ago, telling himself he needed no one, that men born to fight often ended their days alone, but the truth, buried deep in his chest, was that sometimes when the wind carried the sound of coyotes howling across the gulch, he imagined voices, children's laughter, the warmth of something more than survival, and it made him grit his teeth and ride harder, as if speed could chase ghosts away. On that particular afternoon, the air shimmered with heat, the cattle restless, tongues lolling, their lowing carried faintly across the valley as he herded them toward a patch of stubborn grass near the rocks, and it was there, in the corner of his eye, that he noticed a shape, small, dark, collapsed against the sandstone as if the land itself had spit it out. At first, he thought it was another dead animal, a deer brought low by thirst or maybe a coyote that had strayed too far, but as he drew Dusty closer, narrowing his eyes against the glare, the shape resolved into something human, frail, broken, and unmistakably alive in the smallest, weakest of ways. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching on dry earth, one hand brushing the butt of his revolver, not because he expected a fight, but because out here, habit was survival, and he crouched beside the figure. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat, though he would have denied it later if asked, for Sam Harlan was not the sort of man who admitted shock. It was a girl, maybe 17 at most, her hair black as raven feathers tangled across her face, her skin burned and cracked by the sun, her dress torn and streaked with dust and blood, an Apache, no doubt, the lines of her cheekbones, the braids that had half come undone, the small leather pouch clutched desperately in her hand told him everything at once, who she was, what danger he might be in, and how precarious his choice was in this moment. Her lips moved, cracked and dry, whispering something in her tongue he could not understand, though he recognized the sound of water in her plea, a sound so faint it might have been the wind. Sam stared at her, his jaw tightening, his mind a storm of instincts and memories, because to help her meant risking the wrath of her people if they found her in his care, and to leave her meant letting death take her, and though he had long tried to convince himself that he was no man's savior, that his soul was too worn for charity, the truth was that he had seen too many young faces die in uniform during the war. Too many boys left bleeding in mud while others turned their heads, and he could not be one of those men again, not now, not when the desert itself seemed to be watching, waiting to see what he would do. "Damn it," he muttered, more to himself than to her, and with a grunt he slid his arms beneath her frail body, lifting her as carefully as if she were spun glass, feeling the heat of fever burning through her thin frame, the way her breath rasped shallow in her chest, and he carried her to Dusty, mounting with a skill born of years in the saddle, settling her against him so her head rested faintly on his chest. She clutched the pouch tighter even in her weakness, as if it were her lifeline, and Sam did not try to pry it free. Whatever it was, it mattered more than her strength, and out here, men learned not to question what others held close to their hearts. The ride back to his cabin was long and heavy, the weight of her frailty pressing into him, her shallow breaths a constant reminder of the thin line between life and death, and Sam kept his eyes on the horizon, half expecting arrows to whistle out of the rocks at any moment, half daring them to, though he knew full well he would not survive if the Apache caught him carrying one of their own. The cabin came into view at last, a lonely shape of rough-hewn logs against the emptiness, a place built by calloused hands to withstand both storm and solitude, and as Dusty trotted into the small yard, Sam slid down, carrying the girl inside, laying her gently on his cot, the only piece of furniture softer than hardwood in the room. She stirred faintly, her eyes opening just a crack, dark as midnight and filled with both fear and defiance, and for the briefest second, Sam felt as though those eyes were seeing straight into him, stripping away his walls, reading the scars carved deep inside, but then she closed them again, drifting back toward the edge. Moving quickly, with the focus of a man who had done such work before in the mud of battlefields, he fetched water from the barrel, dampening a rag to press against her lips, coaxing her to drink, watching as her throat moved weakly with each swallow. He boiled water in the blackened pot hanging over the fire, crushed herbs he kept for his own wounds and fevers, things a Mexican vaquero had once taught him in exchange for whiskey, and he cleaned the wound at her ribs, a shallow but angry gash that had already begun to fester in the desert heat. She flinched when he touched it, her hand twitching toward the pouch, but Sam spoke low, calm, steady, the voice of a man who had soothed frightened horses and dying comrades alike. "Easy now, girl. I ain't here to hurt you. You're safe." He wasn't sure she understood, but he said it anyway, because sometimes words were more for the speaker than the listener. Hours passed, the fire crackling softly, the desert night creeping in around the cabin, coyotes calling from the ridges, and Sam sat there, watching over her, his rifle propped against the wall, his revolver within reach, though he suspected neither would save him if her people came looking. He didn't ask himself why he had done it, why he had lifted her instead of riding away. He knew the answer too well, though he buried it deep. The soldier in him, the man who once believed in something, refused to let another child be swallowed by death when his hands could stop it. And so, in that quiet night, as the stars burned cold and fierce overhead, Sam Harlan, the loner rancher, found himself keeping vigil over a life he had no right to save, knowing the desert kept its own kind of ledger, and that sooner or later, the debt would come due.